Welcome to Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at The Volume. Happy Thursday, everybody. You're almost all the way through the week. I hope you have big plans for the weekend. Absolutely jam-packed show tonight. What an incredible basketball game that Milwaukee Bucks and Brooklyn Nets game was on so many different levels. It was back and forth like 5 different times. There was a bunch of shifts in just the style of the game and the way it was being played out. We're going to break that game down in detail, and then we're going to get into Anthony Davis and the story that he is going to be, Shams Charania reported that he's going to be returning on Friday, and it looks like LeBron will be as well. I have a couple of key stats that are going to explain why I think that the Lakers still have an outside chance of trying to turn things around. And then for those of you guys who stick around the end, we're going to play some games, and we also have a breakdown of the LA Clippers and a theory that I have about something that I think might be coming down the line here very soon regarding the Clippers. But let's start with that Bucks-Nets game. So like I said, an incredible back and forth type of flow. You know, I always talk about how the NBA is about matchups. You know, their styles make fights. It's all those classic cliches. But the gist of it is that, you know, you have a certain punch that you can throw, and it might work better against one opponent than it will against another. And these two teams could not be more different in the way that they play basketball. Milwaukee is so much of a brute force attack at every position. Even Chris Middleton, one of their most skilled players, is a very physically imposing 6'8", huge forward that tries to back you down and work out of the post a lot of the time. But Drew Holiday's this power guard, you know, just like runs people over, getting to the basket, dominant defensive player, has a good amount of skill, but it's not his bread and butter. He's very much a brute force power guard is what I always call him. And then you have Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's basically like the modern version of Shaq that operates on the perimeter. Going over to the Nets, it's Kyrie Irving, arguably the most skilled basketball player to ever touch a basketball court. It's Kevin Durant, you know, this very slender, tall, arguably the best scorer to ever touch the basketball court. And their third best player right now is probably Seth Curry, an undersized guard who is as skilled as you'll find in a role player in the league, but not a brute force type of player. And it was interesting to see that flow throughout the game and the way that that shifted as each team kind of flexed their individual skill sets. At the beginning of the game, it was all Nets. In that first quarter, the Nets were, the Bucks were sending a lot of extra help towards Kevin Durant. They were trapping him on every pick and roll, and they turned him into a playmaker, and he made them pay for that. He had 5 assists in the first quarter. I thought he was making the right play every time down the floor. It was interesting to see the way that that disrupted his rhythm as the game went along. This is a long-standing theory I have. Like, standstill jump shooters, they don't need as much rhythm because every jump shot they take looks the same. Like every shot you see Stanley Johnson take from a 3-point line in a game looks exactly the same. But guys like KD, guys like Kyrie, they're very rhythm oriented. Every shot they take looks different. They have to be adaptable. And I feel like those kinds of guys are very dependent on rhythm. And there was a stretch of the game, I think KD didn't score in the entire second and third quarters. I thought that was directly tied to the way that Milwaukee trapped him and sent extra help towards him throughout, kind of disrupting his rhythm. He was playing great basketball. He was making the right play, but that's the other impact that that kind of thing has. It disrupts the rhythm and flow. And KD was able to make some big jump shots towards the end of the game, but he wasn't the same type of efficient jump shooter that we normally see. And I think that that was part of that strategy. But the double teams and all that help and all that trapping was hurting the Bucks in that first quarter. Right at the end of the first quarter, KD took an easy trap on a ball screen, dumped it to Drummond on the short roll, quick, easy kick out to Seth Curry. Bam, they're up 7 to end the first quarter. But then comes the second quarter. KD steps out of the game for a minute, and now that brute force attack takes over. Giannis is an absolute monster in the second quarter, just running people over, getting to the basket. And next thing you know, we got ourselves a basketball game. Then we get into that third quarter. The Bucks are kind of in control again. But then all of a sudden, Kyrie starts making shots and KD starts making shots, and they go on a run. And then we had that weird Chris Middleton play, which was, you know, you never want to see a very important player to the outcome of a game like that get removed, but that's a textbook play that a guy has to be ejected for. You can't pull somebody out of midair when they're jumping at full speed. It's such a dangerous play, very similar to what happened to Alex Caruso when he broke his wrist, which ironically enough, I was literally listening to Alex Caruso on the JJ Redick podcast today, and he said that Grayson Allen still has not apologized for that, which I thought was very interesting. Chris Middleton's a good guy. He's not that type of player. Just a random act of violence, needed to be ejected. At that point, it looked like the game was over. The Nets made a couple of big plays. They were up by 9 with 3 minutes left. And then it was just incredible execution. From that point forward, the extent to which the Bucks locked down defensively was so incredibly impressive to me. That's how you come back from down 9 with 3 minutes left. It's that high-level defensive execution mixed with their athleticism. There was a play in early overtime. Well, first of all, at the end of regulation, that play where KD got the jump shot, he's working on Wesley Matthews, and as we've seen several times, he did it at the end of regulation, and he did it at the end of overtime, and he did it twice at the end of that Game 7 against the Bucks in the playoffs last year. KD's go-to move when he needs a jump shot at the end of the game is hard dribble left, get cut off, spin, and elevate. And that you could tell that's the move he gets most comfortable with when he knows he can take off. He knows he's going to get a clean look at the basket. He takes the outcome out of the defender's hands and puts it in his hands. And Giannis really smartly threw a late double team at KD right as he was spinning off of Wesley Matthews. I talk about this a lot on the show, but if you catch an offensive player in the middle of their move, it's a lot harder for them to counter. He disrupted KD, and KD is such an insane talent. Somehow he still got a decent look off. He just missed it. But a really smart play from Giannis. And then in overtime, the Bucks just completely clamped down. There was a sequence where KD was working on Wesley Matthews on the left wing, and Giannis kind of doubles out of the strong side corner off of Seth Curry. KD makes the right pass to Seth Curry. Seth Curry's wide open, but somehow Giannis closes out on him and takes away the shot because he's just a freak of nature. The ball gets worked back around. It ends up in Dragic's hands. Dragic drives into the lane. Giannis comes over and doubles again, and Seth Curry relocates over to the right wing, gets kicked out to Seth Curry. He's wide open again, and Giannis brings another terrifying closeout to chase him off the line again. And I'm just sitting there watching him like, man, when this Bucks team really, really tightens the screws defensively, they are a frightening team to play against. When they have the type of physical, like the physical overwhelming nature of their lineups. Like I said, Drew Holiday has that power, size, and strength combination that you don't see a lot at the guard position. Obviously, Giannis is a freak, and Chris Middleton did a really nice job all night on Kevin Durant so that he was never comfortable. He applied good ball pressure across half court. I thought it was a really fascinating game, very up and down, and then in overtime, it just became about the Nets being incapable of scoring. And then we had a couple of fouls. I thought it was really impressive the way that Giannis missed those 2 free throws, 2 very important free throws. I thought it was a bad call. I thought KD played great defense on that possession. I thought Giannis chicken winged him a little, but he got away with it, got the foul, goes to the line, misses both. Then KD goes down and makes all 3 free throws, but Giannis came right back down. I thought it was genius that Mike Budenholzer did not call a timeout after those free throws. They had one to burn. They didn't use it. It was so smart because you gave Giannis the full court runway. It was very similar to a play in Game 3 of the Eastern Conference semifinals in 2018 when LeBron made the game-winning bank shot floater off the glass against the Raptors. When you have a freight trains type of player, which was only a handful of guys like that in the league, and Giannis is one of them. If you give them a head start in transition, it's actually a better option than bringing it in against the half-court set when they just don't have that same head of steam. The wall is already built, and it becomes a much tougher offensive assignment. You know, Nick Claxton kind of hacked down on Giannis right as he was going up. It was unfortunate because KD was right there in help. I think he would have blocked it off the glass because Giannis was double pumping on the play, so he wasn't trying to dunk it. He would have laid it up. Just unfortunate the way it goes. And then KD goes to his go-to move again, that hard dribble left, spin back, elevate, and it went in and out. And that's how the story goes. I still think the Nets are just a little bit better. I talked about this at length a couple days ago. This is the way the game goes. Like, Kevin Durant did not have a good shooting night tonight overall. Over the course of Giannis got a lot of easy stuff over the course of the game. That's stuff that they can tighten up, tighten the screws over the course of a playoff series. Because, with Giannis, it's interesting. When you build the wall on him, the game does get incredibly difficult for him relative to the way it is when the game's an open floor and he's operating at an advantage all the time. And so the interesting thing is going to be with Giannis is how he can adjust to that. When you're playing a team like Brooklyn and you're Giannis, you have a physical advantage against literally everybody. Last year, they tried playing Blake Griffin. He had some success against him early in the series, but Blake Griffin has taken a significant physical decline since then, so he's out of the picture. And so now it's like it's Nick Claxton, it's Kevin Durant, it's a little bit of Andre Drummond on the backside. It's not. James Johnson actually did an okay job on him for stretches tonight, but they're not physically equipped for that type of matchup. And what's going to be really interesting for me with Giannis is if he does beat Brooklyn, let's say in the first round, there is going to be a team that he's going to play at some point for 7 games that has better physical tools to throw his way. If you look at his playoff run last year, even as he's working up his way through, he makes it through that Brooklyn team that's injury decimated, right? Then he plays that Atlanta team, and they play a lot of Clint Capella on him. He's okay. They have some wings, but they're not a super physically stout team. And then you get to the finals, and as soon as DeAndre Ayton was off the floor, they had nobody that they could throw at him. Jay Crowder's too short. Their backup center, Frank Kaminsky, was just completely incapable of that task. And that's why when I talked about, when I did the video talking about how I thought Giannis was still below Kevin Durant and LeBron, I talked about how those two guys have this plethora of evidence of the way they succeed in so many different environments. For instance, LeBron in 2020 in the bubble, he was on the better team every single series. He had Anthony Davis on his team as well. Like, if that was his only title, you could point to some fortunate circumstances there. Kevin Durant, Steph Curry are on their couches. They had the most talent in that entire playoff run. The Miami Heat were kind of a strange team to make it out of the Eastern Conference, but you don't judge LeBron for that because he has so much other success in his past that adds legitimacy to it. You've also seen him do what he did in 2016, so you don't think of 2020 as a fortunate run. You've seen what he did in 2013 and in 2012, so you don't think of that as a fortunate run, even with all of his finals runs when he didn't win the title. Giannis got some beneficial, luck of the draw type stuff with his matchups throughout the playoff run last year. So when I was saying, I'd like to see him do it again, what I'm talking about is what happens when you get the bad matchup? Who's going to be like the Spurs were for LeBron, the team that takes away everything that he does well and forces him to do something that makes him uncomfortable. There's going to be a team at some point in the next couple of years, very well maybe this year, that puts Giannis in a predicament again. And I'm really curious to see how he responds, because to me, that's going to be the difference between him being on the same tier as Kevin Durant and LeBron and him being above those guys. That's the next step. The malleability, the facing your worst enemy, your greatest weakness, staring it right in the eye and overcoming that. That's going to be the difference between Giannis being a one-time champion and him being a 5-time champion. Because in that 5 trips to the finals or whatever it is, there's going to be years where it doesn't break perfectly for you, where you don't get to play Trae Young in the conference finals, where you don't get Kyrie Irving landing on someone's foot, where Kevin Durant does, have his foot behind the line. There are going to be series where that kind of stuff works against him, and I'm really curious to see how Giannis evolves in the long run there. Again, like I said the other night, the biggest thing I'm looking for him there is his passing ability. Way less concerned about his ability to knock down a jump shot. For the record, it was a huge weapon that he was able to knock down that step back 3 tonight to send it to overtime. That's a great weapon to have in your bag for very specific scenarios. But nobody can guard Giannis one-on-one on the block, literally in the entire league. So I'm more concerned about how he handles multiple defenders than I am for him shooting jump shots and things along those lines. When I'm comparing guys like Giannis and KD and LeBron, or I'm comparing guys like Jokic and Embiid. It's a lot of like in the eye of the beholder and a lot of like, what's their situation like, right? Because like I said, they couldn't be more different. KD is surgical. Giannis is brute force. So a lot of it depends on the roster that you're with. A lot of it depends on matchups. There are going to be specific matchups where look, Philly's a great example. I think Brooklyn would destroy Philly because they can attack a lot of Philly's specific weaknesses. I know Giannis just beat Philly the other night and looked great, but in the course of a playoff series, they have a lot more audibles, a lot more, extra cards in their deck that they can throw at Giannis that will make things more complicated for them. I think Philly is a tougher playoff matchup for Giannis and for Milwaukee than they've had in the last couple of years. That's going to be an interesting wrinkle there. So when people say like, which guy do you think is better, KD or Giannis, or who's going to win this playoff series, the Nets or Brooklyn, so much of it is in the eye of the beholder, and so much of it is about matchups, and so much of it is about who else is on the floor with you. Look at how much the Kyrie injury completely changed the dynamic of that series last year. But it was an incredibly entertaining basketball game. That's why I love the format of the 7-game series. It takes some of that flux, it takes some of that wild cardness out and makes it so that you have a chance to fight another day. So that you have a chance to change some of there were a lot of possessions in the middle of that game where the Nets were straight up giving Giannis lanes to the basket without help. Like that's stuff that you can tighten up over the course of a playoff series. I'm really curious. The Bucks absolutely strangled the Nets defensively at the end of that game, but there were some openings. They were sending a ton of help. They were sending a lot of strong side overload type stuff. So I'm really curious to see how the Nets could counter that kind of thing. Fantastic basketball game, gun to my head. I still think the Nets are just a hair better, just a hair more versatile, and I think they have more time and more room to improve between now and potentially a matchup with one of the better teams in the East at that point. I'm hopeful that they catch a good draw in the first round so they get out easy, because I would love to see just a huge, incredible highlight fight between one of these two teams at the end of the day. For those of you who are just joining us, this is Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at The Volume. I wanted to move on to the Lakers for a minute. Currently playing the Jazz tonight. We weren't going to cover that tonight because of LeBron and Anthony Davis being out. We're going to talk a lot of Lakers over the course of the next week, because I really genuinely believe that they're going to have, as long as everybody stays healthy, as long as AD stays healthy, and as long as LeBron stays healthy, I think this Laker team is going to make a little bit of noise over this last 6-game stretch of the season and show that they can potentially be better than what they've shown us this season. And I have one stat to evidence that. So this season, I've shown you some of the ugly stats surrounding LeBron and AD this year, but there's context there. For instance, I said LeBron and Anthony Davis this year on the floor together have fared worse than the Lakers did last year with LeBron and AD on the bench. That's how much of a catastrophe this season has been. But the context there is they spent the entire first chunk of the season playing DeAndre Jordan at center, who's not an NBA player, playing Kent Bazemore at the 2 guard, who may or may not be an NBA player anymore, certainly wasn't a good fit with this specific team. There was a lot of just the Lakers playing into their weaknesses. So I have one stat that is evidence of the fact that I think the Lakers have a better punch than they've shown. So this year, when LeBron, AD, and Russ are all on the court together, but there's no center. So DeAndre Jordan and Dwight Howard off the floor. Any of the guys who played center for the Lakers this year off the floor. They've played 184 minutes with that trio, which is sad for a whole other reason, because that's just how terrible the injury luck has been this season. For all that we've talked about all the self-sabotage, all the Rob Pelinka, all the Genie bus, all the LeBron pushing for the Russ trade, all the bad signings, injuries have played a huge role in the way this has gone. So that trio has only played 184 minutes without a center, and they are plus 11.4 net. That's a pretty damn good number. It's not a dominant number, but it's a really good number. That's a number that tells me a team that can potentially win a championship if some things break right. And that's with no continuity. That's with LeBron and AD barely playing a handful of games together in a row before one of them gets hurt. That's with the clunky Russ fit. There's a bunch of other contexts there that would even push that number lower than you would think. But they're plus 11.4 in 184 minutes with those three on the floor and no center this year. And that is the light at the end of the tunnel. Now, the reason why that could get better, this is the case for why this team could potentially go on a run, is now you're playing better role players. Instead of it being Kent Bazemore, instead of it being Avery Bradley, instead of it being Trevor Ariza, instead of it being Dwight Howard minutes, which have proven to be really bad as of late, instead of those players, it's guys like Austin Reeves, who's taken almost all of Avery Bradley's minutes. He's a significantly better player at this point in his career. It's been Stanley Johnson taking over for Trevor Ariza. He's a better player at this point in his career. It's Wenyen Gabriel playing some of those other forward center minutes. He's a better player right now than Dwight Howard or DeAndre Jordan were. So you've got better rotational role players in that mix now. And then last but not least, it's about the shrunken rotation. Over the course of the regular season, you're trying to keep LeBron and AD's minutes down to 38 minutes per game. There's these random shifts that don't make any sense. Think about how often this year you've looked at random lineups that have had three little guards on the floor, like Avery Bradley, Russell Westbrook, Malik Monk at the same time, with like Talen Horton-Tucker, who's only 6'4", playing power forward. There's been a lot of examples of where the Lakers have had to dive into their weaknesses as a result of just injuries and trying to get through the regular season. In the playoffs, it's going to be 38 to 40 minutes of LeBron and AD. In a big pivotal game, it's going to be 42 to 44 minutes of those guys. It's only going to be like 5 or 6 other role players that get to play. Frank's going to be able to just straight up bench a guy if he's not playing well, because he's not trying to spell for the 82 game season. He's not trying to save people's legs. You're just playing every game like it's your last. Those are the reasons why I think they have a puncher's chance. If you look at their remaining schedule, so everything broke down over the last 2 days exactly like I expected, although it was a little touch and go with San Antonio and Memphis the other night. I can't remember who it was for the Spurs, but one of their young guards had a decent look to win that game, and had he made it, all of a sudden you're down one game on the Spurs with them having the tiebreaker. That could have been the final nail in the coffin, but things broke the way I expected. I expect the Lakers to finish losing tonight in Utah, which will put both teams, the Spurs and the Lakers, at 31 and 45 with 6 games left. Except for the Lakers are bringing back LeBron James and Anthony Davis. So the remaining schedule for the Lakers, they play the Pelicans on Friday, they play the Nuggets on Sunday, and then they finish the season with the Suns, the Warriors, the Thunder, and the Nuggets. Now let's take a real quick look at those games. Do I think the Lakers with LeBron James and Anthony Davis playing for their basketball lives at home on Friday will get a win? Yes, I do. Do I think that they're capable of beating that Nuggets team that's, not that talented? Absolutely. Do I think they can beat the Suns? Hell no, not yet. maybe by the time they get to the first round, but that's probably a loss. But they could be 2-1 at that point. Do I think they could beat the Warriors without Steph Curry? Absolutely. Do I think they can beat the Thunder? Absolutely. And then there's the Nuggets again. So 5-1 is very much on the table down the stretch. In fact, I would argue if LeBron and AD are healthy and playing like their lives depend on it, they should win those games. So that will put the Lakers firmly, potentially, if the Pelicans drop some games, potentially at that 9 seed, but that'll get them into the play-in. I believe as long as LeBron and AD don't get hurt here in the next couple of days, I believe the Lakers will make it into the play-in game. And for all the reasons that I just laid out, I think they have a chance to, at least a puncher's chance, to make some noise there. Would they have to get some breaks? Yeah. Would Chris Paul have to not play super well? Would the Suns potentially have to have an injury? Would there have to be some younger role players to struggle? Absolutely. There's a bunch of stuff that has to break right for them, but I'm in a different mind space than I was about a month ago when it looked like this team was basically trying to quit. All right, for those of you guys who are listening on Twitter Spaces, as you guys probably noticed over the course of the last week, we had our last 2 crash, and it's because when we funnel our YouTube show into Spaces, it just can't handle it. So I'm ending the Twitter Space right now, but we have a lot more show to go. We're going to play some games. We're going to bring my guy Carson on. So hop over to the YouTube link. You can find it in my Twitter feed. We're going to talk about the Clippers. We're going to talk about James Harden's big loss tonight. We're going to talk about a bunch of different stuff. So get over to YouTube. And for everybody on Spaces, thank you guys for coming to hang out. I'll see you soon. All right, everybody on YouTube, I'm bringing my guy Carson on. We are going to play a game.
What's up, Jason?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. This has been a super fun night of NBA action, obviously. Bucks Nets you talked about. We got Clippers Bulls in OT. DeMar has 44 now, I think. So we've had a lot of good basketball to watch. Yeah. All right. We've got a fun game for you here today. It's called That's What He Said. So we're going to give you a soundbite, a quote from around the league that we think is interesting, and have you listen, and then I'll give you a question, get your thoughts on it. Sound good?
All right, I'm excited. Let's hear it.
All right, so the first one we have is from Draymond Green on the Draymond Green Show, obviously his podcast with The Volume, talking about how he was disappointed with his own play as of late, with the Warriors' play as of late overall. So let's take a listen.
The reality is I've been terrible. I've been terrible defensively. I've been terrible offensively. And so that's just what it is. Now, what am I going to do to fix that? Well, I'm going to continue to do what I've been doing, which is putting the work in. And ultimately, my whole life is a product of hard work. You put the work in, you get the results. I know I've put the work in, but I also know things don't happen overnight. You don't just go from missing 2.5, almost 3 months of basketball where everybody's playing at a high level and just return, and that's that. It doesn't work like that.
So obviously this has now been a pretty consistent downward trend for the Warriors, and you've talked about this a lot as of late. So how concerned are you about them right now as we head into the postseason?
I don't think they're a top-tier contender, but I felt that way for a long time, and it's not attached to Draymond. I think I had them at second in my contenders the other day, and it's only because of how much I trust those three. I have an unbelievable amount of respect for Steph, Clay, and Draymond and what they've accomplished in their past and what they will be capable of when they get to the postseason. Now, as far as Draymond goes, a couple things they're the wall of getting out of NBA shape and into, or I'll just call it basketball shape. When you're getting in and out of basketball shape, it's a process. We call it breaking through the wall. So essentially, there comes a point when you're really working your way back into shape where your body almost gets behind in its recovery and you feel clunky and you feel slow. And it can take like the better part of a month before you really get back. Like if they make it to the second or third round, it might take until the middle of the second round or early third round before Draymond really, really looks like Draymond. Just in terms of his physicality, because that's just a process. Now, as far as his offense goes, so much of it is Steph. Like Steph and Draymond are very symbiotic players. A lot of what Draymond does offensively depends on his ability to make reads in 4-on-3 scenarios. And the only way he can get 4-on-3 scenarios is if you have a player like Steph Curry that commands a trap on every single pick and roll. So a lot of what Draymond does offensively is limited when he's not playing with Steph Curry. And in return, Steph needs Draymond for everything that he does. So they're a very symbiotic pairing. But I'm not worried about Draymond at all. And he's right. I trust his hard work. And I've no doubt that they'll be able to recapture what they were as long as Steph can get back on the court and get healthy.
What do you think is the one thing that needs to change most for them beyond obviously just getting Steph back? But what do they really still need to figure out and fix above everything else?
I think they're fine. Like they and right now, as currently constructed, they're as good as they can be without a massive identity change. So like they're like the Lakers with their injury luck this year. Like Draymond got hurt, was out forever, and then he comes back, and then Steph got hurt. So everything you've seen on the court with them this year is kind of irrelevant to what they're going to be, right? Now, that group of Steph, Clay, Dre, and Jordan Poole kind of off the bench, and then all of those wings that they have, that all works great. The greatest weakness of this team is the same weakness they had in 2015, 2016, and in 2019 after Kevin Durant went down. Steph Curry is not a physically imposing star. So when defenses really lock in on him, if he misses shots, they don't have another great punch. I love the big wings in the league. This is why I always get drawn back to Giannis, LeBron, and Kevin Durant. When you have the ability to really apply a physical pressure on the game with your physical tools, I think that's an extra punch and an extra versatility. So I'm still a big believer in them. When they're healthy, I'd put them right below Phoenix in that next tier, but they're never going to become the world beaters they were again unless they find a big forward that can develop into a rim pressuring guy. Wiggins isn't it. Maybe it becomes Jonathan Kuminga in the future, but you know how I feel about lining up timelines, so who knows? But that's what I view as their biggest weakness.
All right. Well, again, that specific soundbite came from Draymond's podcast, and he had Jason Tatum on this week. That's coming out soon, so everybody should go ahead and check that out. Always super interesting hearing him talk to other NBA guys. All right. So our next quote here is related to the Defensive Player of the Year conversation, and you just did a Timpf's tape breakdown on the Jazz defense. Obviously, Rudy Gobert is always somewhere in that conversation. Some people calling him Stifle Tower, some people calling him Rudy Gogurt, deeply divisive. But Marcus Smart came out and talked about sort of how they compare defensively, and he said, Rudy can't guard all 5 spots. I can guard all 5 spots, and I've been doing it. I've done it very well. So, Jason, what's your reaction to that, and who would you have as depoy right now?
Wait, that was Marcus Smart that said that?
Yeah.
You're kidding me. Okay. So I, like everybody else who a couple years ago jumped on the Rudy Gobert slander train, you know, when that all was going down, Utah Jazz fans, people that I trust, like I try to find people that cover each team that follow them on a day-to-day basis, because you can never, like, my knowledge of the Lakers will never be the same as what I have for the rest of the teams, because I've literally watched every single game they've played this year. For the rest of the league, I do my best to parse out my time, right? The Jazz fans kept coming to me and saying, like, it's not Rudy, it's the other guys. And so I dove into the tape extensively. Rudy guards ones absolutely fine. Rudy can guard all 5 positions on the floor extremely well. He is not the problem. I know highlights get put in there where a guy scores on somebody, but all of the best defensive players in the league get scored on. You can find Ben Simmons getting scored on. You can find Kawhi getting scored on. It's all part of the bit surrounding Rudy Gobert. The gist of it is the Utah Jazz have a huge void in their perimeter defense, and so they rely on Rudy Gobert to clean everything up. And all of the really smart teams in the league have figured out that if you get him in rotation, even just once or twice, and get him out to the perimeter, then all of a sudden you have no defense on the perimeter and then no help on the back line, and it's just a layup line. They have a history of having really good defense in the aggregate grand scheme regular season, but they struggle against really good teams. They struggle against 5-out teams. They struggle against teams that have a lot of guys who can dribble drive. And so I am going to have Rudy Gobert's back here. Marcus Smart's amazing, but he's not Rudy Gobert.
So I think this is interesting because a lot of times people do bring up the argument of versatility, and this is always a thing with Draymond versus Rudy, and it was a thing with Ben Simmons versus Rudy. But my thought has kind of been, if you're just talking about regular season defense, you know, when it comes to just the overwhelming impact that he does have as that deterrent and like the defensive on-off numbers, the opponent field goal differential, it's really hard to argue against Rudy Gobert as depoy kind of every year. But if he's not really the best defensive player on the planet when it matters most, do you think that there needs to be like a reevaluation there? Or like, do you just kind of have to give it to him because in regular season terms, you know, nobody really is more impactful most of the time?
So, but in Rudy's defense, though, the Jazz defense falling apart in the postseason is not necessarily Rudy falling apart. So now, if we're talking like who's better, Draymond or Rudy, that's a different conversation because they're kind of different in a bunch of different ways. Rudy's all length and Draymond is all physicality. You know, he's a good vertical defender. He bumps people off of their line really, really well. But like both of them have shown a propensity to get beat in straight line drive scenarios on the perimeter. Neither of them are great out in the perimeter. They're just fantastic backline defenders. I would argue that Draymond's probably a little bit better of a backline communicator. Like he's a higher IQ defender, which I think might give him an edge in my book. But like, again, I think if we saw Rudy Gobert doing what Brook Lopez was doing, we would all be terrified. So for the Bucks. So I guess what I'm saying is I want to distance the Jazz's defense from what Rudy Gobert is capable of as a defensive player, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Bucks there real quick. We have some people in the comments talking about Giannis. Where do you think he figures into that conversation?
For defense?
Yeah, in terms of DPOY best defender alive.
So he is, as a help defender, the best you'll find in the league. But so Joel Embiid did a really interesting bit on this with JJ Redick the other day in his podcast. Actually, I think it released today. And Joel basically said, I think a big man should be defensive player of the year every year. And what he pointed out, which is an interesting element to this, is in a lot of ways, the backline defender, so whoever plays that Draymond, Rudy Gobert, Brook Lopez type of role, that guy actually is the quarterback of the defense. So beyond his individual responsibilities, he's also responsible because he's behind everybody. Like, it doesn't make sense for the point guard to call out plays because he can't see what's happening behind him. But the backline defender is essentially making a read based on what he sees as the offense is coming down the floor, and he's calling out coverages. So there's a whole other element to that. So as good as Giannis is, and I'm not undercutting that at all, he kind of factors more into that, like, he's a perimeter player who's great in help, but he's not a Draymond Green like quarterback of a defense, which is a different. I talked a lot today. He's frightening when he's closing out. He's amazing. You could argue in a 1 or 2 possession setting, you wouldn't want anybody else on the planet as a defender. But in terms of the day in, day out chess match type stuff, especially in a playoff series, I think I'd have to put the Rudy Gobert's and the Draymond still ahead of him, because you have to factor in that quarterback of the defense element, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I got to say, Jason, you are just throwing me lobs with the transitions here, because you mentioned Embiid on the JJ Redick podcast, Old Man in the Three. That is where our next soundbite comes from. And you've been critical of Embiid's tendency to go out and sort of hunt fouls in an unnatural fashion. And he actually spoke out on that because JJ kind of called him out about it for a second. So let's take a listen.
This is a great example of what I like to call foul baiting.
Yeah, that's not foul baiting.
This is what we're going to talk about here.
But you play basketball. This is basketball IQ. I'm in a penalty. And right before that play, I don't know if it was before that play or the play after, I just knew that, they had a couple fouls. And it's easy. This is basketball IQ. So people are always saying flops or, foul baiting and all that stuff. That's just me being smarter than everybody else.
So what do you think, Jason? Do you agree with Embiid, a.k.a. the NBA player you would least like to be slapped by?
So first of all, I loved the way that JJ went at him in that podcast. There was another clip at the very end, like right as he's signing up. He's like, oh, by the way, when you're working out with Drew Hanlon, what do you say? Like, how often do you work on foul baiting? Like 50% of the time? Like 70% of the time? And he's like kind of rubbing it in his face. I loved it because Joel's right. He's right. It's an intelligence thing. It's a basketball IQ thing. The guys like Chris Paul, the guys like James Harden, the guys like Joel Embiid in the league, I admire them taking advantage of the rules. When I am mad about foul grifting, it's more towards the league. Like, for instance, at the beginning of the season, they did such a great job legislating it out, but then the refs just kind of all drifted back into their old selves as the season progressed. And I put the pressure on the league to deal with this problem. So when foul grifting is not a Joel Embiid problem, it's an NBA problem. However, I don't think it's smart to build that into your game in such a way that is so reliable, because we know the league is attacking it. Like, you literally saw this entire offseason. It was a big story. I would venture to guess that within 5 years, that will be a huge taboo thing in the league. The idea of doing anything that's not a usual basketball play to try to score. So it's like, it's like, like when I was in high school, I could get away with not studying, but then I got to college and the material became more complicated, and all of a sudden something that I had been reliant on was no longer reliable. That's kind of the way I look at it. Like, if I was James Harden, if I was Joel Embiid, if I was Chris Paul, I would be preparing for the fact that this will not be allowed soon. And I wouldn't want to be caught with my pants down and be one of the guys who's massively struggling. And I pointed this out the other day, but it's just the truth of the matter. As good as Joel Embiid is, there's another bit later in that show where he talks about everyone says I would only average 17 points a game if I didn't get free throws. And he was like, well, that's part of the game. Yeah, but it might not be one day. That's my point. And you might have to be more reliable putting the ball in the basket. And right now you shoot like in the high 40s from the field, and Giannis is shooting in the high 50s, and Nikola Jokic is shooting in the high 50s, and KD and LeBron are doing it with, they're just more efficient at putting the ball in the basket. So you don't want to be caught behind in that regard. So yeah, not Joel Embiid's fault, but he needs to read the writing on the wall.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, his first 2 times in the postseason, I think his free throw attempts were down significantly. Another guy who people would sort of classify probably in a similar conversation, Harden, I think his postseason career average is like at least a free throw fewer than regular season. So obviously as that dynamic changes, like you said, you got to be able to actually just put the ball into the basket. So, all right, that is it for That's What He Said. Just to provide an update on the game that I mentioned when I came on, Bulls won in double overtime. DeMar had 50. So another signature performance from him in
what did Paul George finish with?
Let me check that real quick.
You said he had 40-something in regulation, right?
DeRozan had 44 during overtime. PG had 22.
PG had 22. Did he shoot well? What did he shoot from three?
He shot, let's see.
Because I was blown away that he shot 6 for 9 from three after stepping away from the game for as long as he did, missing a ligament in his shooting arm. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And when you get away from the game of basketball and you're like you're adapting to the speed, like your jumper is the first thing that goes. So I was so impressed. Right. So did he not play well tonight?
Tonight he did not. He was 7 of 20, 2 of 9 from deep. So the shot was not quite there.
Okay. All right, Carson, I appreciate you, man. We're going to see you in just a couple of minutes, all right? All right. So, what happened with Paul George tonight was a little more in line with what I was expecting, him kind of building his rhythm back. But so the Clippers present a really, really interesting question mark or what if coming up over the course of the next couple of weeks, because I'm so flabbergasted as to why Paul George, missing a ligament in his shooting elbow, would not get surgery so that he could be available to work out all offseason to be prepared for next season with Kawhi coming back. It's beyond nonsensical. You would assume that at some point he's going to have to get surgery. It's not like Paul George wants to finish his career missing a ligament, right? I mean, who knows? I don't know what the internal conversations are, but it was so strange to me, which got me thinking a lot about this. Why would Paul George come back? They're in the play-in game, right? If they win, let's say they go to Minnesota and win and they get the 7 seed, you've got to go on the road to Memphis for a playoff series. They're going to be, like, Memphis is going to be heavily favored in that series, even with Paul George. And, it just, I didn't see the point. And so what I kept wondering is, like, what if they know something we don't know? And so then out of nowhere, we see the Clippers release a photo of the Clippers boarding the team plane yesterday, and Kawhi Leonard's getting on the plane. And again, it's so hard to make reads on this kind of stuff because Kawhi keeps everything so close to the chest. His circle is literally as airtight as any professional athlete, as any celebrity that we've seen in the modern era, which is insane when you think about social media and the ease of access to information. So we would never know. Like, if Kawhi was going to play tomorrow or if he didn't plan on playing next season at all, we wouldn't know. We would find out when he put the jersey on. That's the way it would work. And so it's genuinely like an interesting situation. So my theory is that the Clippers are looking at this situation. They looked at how much they punished Phoenix last year. They were a really, really interesting matchup for Phoenix last year. They had a lot of success against them. They lost in 6 games, but there were at least 2 games that I can think of in that series that could have very easily gone the other way. So I think the Clippers are looking at the situation and they're like, we like our chances in the West. The Memphis is too young. Golden State is having injury issues. Nobody else in the conference is nearly as talented. And we like our chances against Phoenix. And then we get to the finals. Who knows what can happen? And I think that they're having conversations behind the scenes. And I think Kawhi has been telling them that he plans on coming back. That's my theory. Again, I have nothing to support it because Kawhi is never in a million years going to tell us anything. But I like it as an interesting kind of wrinkle here. I've talked a lot over the course of the last couple of years, especially since Ty Lue got there, especially after what happened against Phoenix last year and them getting to the conference finals without Kawhi. They are the best team in the league, in my opinion, at maximizing talent. They have the perfect mix of modern coverages and schemes mixed with traditional reliable ones. They run drop when they can. They switch when they can. They mix coverages up a lot. They've even thrown zone in there from time to time. They're a very, very smart basketball team. This is credit to Ty Lue. I talked a lot about this ever since the Cleveland situation, but Ty Lue was rigid when he was in Cleveland, and a lot of coaches struggle in their first coaching gig trying to inflict their personality on a team. And he's come to the Clippers and he's become one of the most malleable and open-minded and ahead of the curve type of coaches that we have in the league. And I'm really, really interested to see, because basically he's taken Reggie Jackson, a couple of interesting young players like Terrence Mann and Amir Coffey. And, obviously Zubac is good. I did a whole video on Isaiah Hartenstein the other day and the way that he punished Rudy Gobert for helping. They've got some interesting young players, but it's a lot of Reggie Jackson and Marcus Morris and Nick Batum. It's not a super talented team. And they're just manufacturing wins by playing really smart basketball. And this takes me back to the whole bit that I had about the Lakers a while back. When you have the playoffs as an excuse to shrink your rotation, and when you plug massive role superstars back in, it takes all of the bad out. So right now the Lakers are playing a game against the Jazz, and they have to fill the normal 72 minutes that LeBron and Anthony Davis would play with vastly inferior players. So what do you think the product is going to be, especially with that team struggling so much with size and athleticism? Look at the Clippers. They've been better than the Lakers this year, significantly better than the Lakers this year, and they've taken 36 minutes of Paul George and Kawhi and replaced them with inferior players. So plugging those two guys back into the picture, slotting everybody appropriately, that not to mention the fact that they will instantly become the 2 best defensive players on the team, it becomes a really, really interesting dynamic. And that combination of Ty Lue and his ability to maximize talent with proper slotting, with a shrunken rotation, with Kawhi and PG back into the fold, instantly makes them a contender. Now, how much of a contender they are depends on a lot of different things. What does Kawhi look like when he gets back? How quickly does he get his rhythm? Like I said, he might not even come back, right? But in that scenario where they do come back, if they can get the fit and the feel back quickly, this could be a really, really dangerous team. And as much as this team has a clear favorite in Phoenix, and they do, this league is very open in a lot of different ways. As dominant as Phoenix has been, they don't have the top tier superstars. As good as the Bucks have looked as of late, I'm still worried about their defense. As good as the Nets can be, I'm worried about their defense and their ability to handle brute force physicality. As good as Golden State can be, I'm worried about their health and whether or not Steph and Draymond are going to look like themselves. Philly lost in Detroit tonight. They've got a whole bunch of issues of their own. Miami got a big win last night against Boston, but they're not a top tier contender. The league is very much open as long as you think you can beat Phoenix. And all of these teams that have these superstars, they all think they can beat Phoenix because they know that if they can at least win the top heavy stuff, if you can outplay Chris Paul and if you can outplay Devin Booker, you give yourself a chance. And obviously Kawhi and Paul George are very capable of that. One thing that would be interesting is avoiding Phoenix buys you time to get those guys back in rhythm. So they're the 8th seed right now. They're probably going to finish as the 8th seed. If they can go into Minnesota and win that play-in game and catch Memphis instead, with Kawhi and Paul George, that buys you an extra round. Two rounds, actually, to potentially get your legs underneath you before you have to deal with that Phoenix matchup. Again, no idea what's going to happen with Kawhi, but he's a very, very interesting wrinkle here. And I have a theory that that's the only reason in the world that you would bring Paul George back, missing a ligament, to flounder in the play-in game, if that makes sense. It has to be for something bigger than that, if that makes sense. All right, we're going to bring my guy Carson back on for one more game before we get out of here.
Jason, long time no see. All right, so this game, pretty intuitive concept. I bet you can figure it out. It's called What's More Likely. I'm going to present you 2 options. You tell me which one is more likely. And you mentioned the Sixers lost in Philly tonight. James Harden was a sparkling 4 of 15 from the field. So given that, given the perennial drama that surrounds him, what's more likely? That he signs the max in Philly or is on another team next season?
He's going to be in Philly next season on the max, but it's because Daryl Morey thinks much more highly of James Harden than we do. So, like, I think that it really just comes down to that. I mean, I said after the game the other day when James Harden played really well, that so much was dependent on his ability to get to the basket, and I wasn't convinced that he can do that enough. And like in that same show, I said, we judge players over large sample sizes, not over short sample sizes. If you catch Talen Horton-Tucker on the right night this year, you'd think he's a future all-star. But his trade value is lower than it's ever been. James Harden has been mostly bad this year with little flashes of good. And how did he respond to one of his best games of the season, losing to the Bucks the other day? He responded by going 4 for 15 against the Detroit Pistons. So, like, I am nowhere near as high on him. I think signing him for a 4-year, whatever the hell that number is going to be, like $250 million, whatever that deal is going to be, I would stay away from that with a 10-foot pole. It is guaranteed to be an albatross at the end. But Daryl Morey's big thing is, like, sign the guy. And he already loves James Harden, and he believes in his ability to flip contracts if he needs to. I wouldn't do it. But at this point, you have to, especially when you factor in everything they just gave up to get him.
Well, according to Daryl Morey, the guy that he has is better than peak Michael Jordan offensively. So he probably does feel pretty good about that. Well, the man who showed Harden and the Sixers up tonight was Cade Cunningham, who has been playing really, really well as of late and had 27 tonight. So what's more likely, Jason, that Cade Cunningham or Evan Mobley is a superstar player in this league?
Oh, I think they're both going to be, but I think Evan Mobley is definitely a safer bet, because the thing with Evan Mobley, and scouts will tell you this, he has consistently struggled with offensive aggression. He's a very naturally giving player. He's very much like, I just want to be a cog in the system, but his talent vastly supersedes that. I think he has the potential to be better than Anthony Davis. We'll see, but I think that he's a safer bet with his combination of physical tools and the obvious increased aggression that's going to come from him in the coming years. I love Cade Cunningham's game. He kind of reminds me of like a more natural American version of Luka Doncic in the sense that he's more of a traditional small forward build, but he doesn't have the overwhelming athleticism, which has forced him to build out the details of his skill set. I always talk about with Luka, what impresses me the most with him is he gets by people off the dribble by using he sells every part of every move with every part of his body. And as a result, he gets little tiny windows of space, And then that's when he uses his strength and physicality to get by people. Cade Cunningham is very similar. A lot of freak athlete type of players, they don't build out those details because they can go down the floor and cross over and they're by the guy anyway, just because they're faster. And I've been super impressed with Cade's like very methodical approach to offense. I think he's going to be a superstar too, but I would say that Evan Mobley is certainly more likely to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think both these guys were, exceptional prospects. Philosophically, I think that it's interesting. Do you have a perspective on a guy like Mobley who did seem to be really high floor because of the freakish defensive versatility, all the things that he could already do well offensively, versus in a guy like Cade, you have potentially, a complete offensive ceiling raiser because of just the kind of dynamic guard that he is. Like, obviously, every case by case is going to be a little bit different, but do you think that one of those two things is inherently more valuable?
So I inherently think that the point forward, the big guy who can initiate everything from the perimeter, is a more valuable player. That's why I did a whole bit on this last week involving why I think KD and Giannis and LeBron are better than Jokic and Embiid by a big margin. But that said, like, Cade doesn't fit that physical imposing mold. Like, he's, and it'll be really interesting to see if this affects Luka when he starts playing in really high leverage playoff series, like when Luka gets to the conference finals or Luka gets to the finals. If there is a team that can start to wear on him physically, I'll be really curious. It hasn't happened yet. And if any team could have done it, it would have been the Clippers. But like, KD has this incredible frame. And then Giannis and LeBron are once in a generation freight train athletes. Cade Cunningham is neither. So I do naturally gravitate towards the archetype of Cade Cunningham in the sense that I look at those guys as more valuable. But in this specific case, I would lean towards Mobley because I don't think Cade can get to the same ceiling as a LeBron, AD, or Giannis. I view Cade as a guy that if things really go well for him, he'll be a persistent top 10 player in the NBA, but I don't think he could ever crack the top 5, whereas I believe Evan Mobley very much could. And one last note on Mobley, he has significantly quicker feet than Anthony Davis, which is a huge part of what will eventually guide his offensive ceiling. Because the big reason why AD can't be Giannis, the big reason why AD can't initiate from the perimeter is he actually has a slow first step. And so he can beat guys off the dribble when they're big plotting centers. But if you put Chris Middleton on Anthony Davis, Chris is going to make him shoot over the top. He's going to slide his feet, But I think Evan Mobley has some of that potential to be a perimeter initiator because he'll be able to make quick moves that generate more separation because he's quicker, in my opinion.
All right. Well, as we talk about some of the great young players that we have in the league right now, obviously, Luka is, as respected and promising as any. So what's more likely, Jason? Luka Doncic wins multiple MVPs or no MVPs in his career?
I think it's far more likely that he gets multiple MVPs. We have not given Luka enough credit for floating a pretty untalented situation. And I think he's aware of these details. In his podcast with JJ Redick that he did the other day, he directly attributed their recent success to defense. And it's an interesting indicator of where Luka's headspace is at. Because this year they have a gimmicky defense. I think they're top 10 still, if I remember correctly. They've slipped a little bit of late, but they've been a pretty good defensive team of late. But they do not have defensive personnel. Maxime Kleber is not a dominant backline defensive player. Dorian Finney-Smith is an excellent defensive wing, but he's pretty much the only guy like that they have on the roster. The rest of these guys, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jalen Brunson, they're bringing in a lot of lesser defensive players. There is going to be a stretch of time in Luka's career where he plays 5 to 7 years in a row with an elite defense and a great secondary ball handler that can create when he's off the floor. And when that happens, they're going to win a shit ton of games. And I don't see any universe where he doesn't win a couple MVPs. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree. He entered this year as the betting favorite going into year 4 with a team that did not have contender level personnel, and the raw production is always going to be there. He's walking 28 9-9 pretty much. So I completely agree. And he's continued to add to and refine his game like year in, year out. So I'm totally with you. I'd be shocked if he doesn't win an MVP. All right, Jason.
I have one last note on Luka really quick.
Go for it.
This dude is getting it done right now almost entirely on natural ability and feel for the game. There will also be a stretch where he embraces taking care of his body and he embraces a hard work element. He literally said in the JJ Redick podcast that he did a step back randomly in a EuroLeague game and the coaches were like, you should do that more often. It's not like this dude was practicing it. So my thing is like, there will be a phase of his career, probably late 20s, early 30s, where he kind of has all those details figured out. And that's when it could get really ridiculous with that guy.
Yeah, no, that is a terrifying concept because, I mean, like you said, he is already among the best players of his age we have ever seen, has been for the last few years. All right, Jason, what's more likely, that the Brooklyn Nets win the Eastern Conference or that they lose in the first round of the playoffs?
Oh, this is a really tough one because I'm picking Brooklyn to win the East. But their series is in the first round. If they faced Milwaukee or Boston, I think it's a 6 or 7 game series, which could go either way. So, like, that's literally what I think is going to happen. They're either going to lose in the first round or they're going to win the whole damn thing. So, I would say, oh, man, I'm going to say it's more likely that they win. But it's barely over a coin flip because it's all about matchups. Like if they catch Miami or Philly in the first round, they're going to cruise through the first round, which buys you an extra 2 weeks to get Ben Simmons back potentially. Ben Simmons is a supernatural fit to just plug in there because they don't need him to do anything other than defend and to make reads out of the short roll or maybe out of the dunker spot, right? So like if they get a good draw and they get bought a lot of extra time, that could be devastating for the rest of the league because they'll be really clicking by the time they get to a Milwaukee or to a Boston. But then they could catch Milwaukee in the first round, not have Ben Simmons, not have some of their defensive details work out, and end up losing. So I could see it going both ways, but I'd lean towards them winning.
All right, last one here, and unquestionably the most important. Star Wars has announced that it's moving the release date of Obi-Wan Kenobi to May 27th. Is it more likely that the show is excellent or terrible?
Wait, they moved it back within the same... Wait, it was supposed to be early May, right? So they moved it just a couple of weeks.
Yes.
That's really strange. Oh, man. So I expect to enjoy it no matter what, but anytime you hear reshoots or delays, that's scary. And this is a really weird timeline they're working in. Them trying to do this series directly goes against some core plot points in Star Wars. And so from that standpoint, like, I expect to be frustrated a lot during it, and reshoots scare me. I expect to enjoy it, but I don't expect to like appreciate its place in the Star Wars story. And I love that you asked me a Star Wars question. Thank you, Carson.
Yeah, of course, man. Got to get you right in your bag. And it's actually even weirder. They moved it 2 days, but they're doing the first 2 episodes at once. So who knows? Who knows what's going on over there?
That could be as simple as them thinking that the cliffhanger at the end of episode 1 isn't good enough, or that this episode 2 will be the one that really captures the audience. Like, here's the thing. It's like with you guys. When it comes to production stuff, I'm leaning entirely on, I know the basketball, that's my bread and butter. I leave the production stuff to you guys. The people promoting this show know exactly what they're doing, and I will trust them to figure it out. As a Star Wars fan, I have to enjoy it. I'm just going to say I don't appreciate the fact that they're going to step on their own plot lines there. There's been a lot of disrespecting George Lucas done by Disney, but that's a whole other story.
You did get in the Hollywood mindset there for a second, though, because I think that's pretty good rationalization that you gave of why they would have made that move. So, don't sell yourself short.
All right. Well, thank you, Carson. I appreciate you coming on, man. All right, guys, that is all we have for tonight. I sincerely appreciate you guys coming to hang out. We will be back tomorrow after the final buzzer of Lakers-Pelicans. I am extraordinarily excited. I think we're going to see some good Laker basketball and a little flash in the pan of greatness from those guys. I appreciate your guys' support as always, and I will see you tomorrow night.